Hi guys, Dylan from Eurospares here. Today we're going to do a bit of a masterclass on the F12 812 exhaust, and luckily we've got an entire one here to go over. So we're going to go through each bit individually and stick around to the end because it is actually a lot more complicated than you might think. So the first thing to start off with are the manifolds, right? And that's the start of pretty much every exhaust system. What are manifolds? Well, in very simple terms, they are collectors that take the exhaust gases coming out of each cylinder and put them into one place so that you can fire them down the exhaust. The first major decider in a way a car sounds is the length of the pipes in the manifolds. So for example, something like a Subaru Impreza has a really distinctive exhaust note because it uses unequal length pipes in the manifolds. Now something like Ferraris, they use equal length pipes, and that is why the spaghetti is laid out the way that it is, and it's so complicated because each of these pipes is exactly the same length. The next major decider is the actual layout of the manifolds, and what do I mean by that? Well, the best example I can give you is something like a 599 GTB and a 599 GTO. We did a reel on this on our Instagram, and it's funny, as soon as someone points out how different those two things sound, you never unhear it. And the major contributing factor between those two cars having such different sounds is the fact that the GTB uses 6:2:1 manifolds, i.e. the pipes go from 6 pipes into 2 pipes before finally merging into 1 on each side. But the GTO uses 6:1 manifolds, meaning that all 6 pipes meet in the same place. And you might notice, if you've ever heard an F12 or an 812 in person, that it sounds much more like a GTO. And that is because it uses 6 there into 1 there. So that's the first thing, right? 6:1 manifolds is a really, really big reason why the 812 F12 has such a high-pitched exhaust note. From the manifolds, we then move to the catalysts. Now, buckle up, because we're about to get really nerdy, because the catalysts are the most complicated part of the system, absolutely hands down. Now, the first question we need to answer is, what is a catalyst and what does it do? Well, this is a catalyst, and its job is to basically clean up the gases coming out of the engine before they leave the end of the exhaust. And they do that by running the gases over a catalytic mesh that has catalytic materials like rhodium and palladium. And what those catalytic materials do is they convert the gases from noxious substances into things like water. And the next thing to discuss are cell counts. Now, you would have heard 800 cell, 200 cell, decat, all that stuff bandied about. And we'll get to that in some more detail shortly. But fundamentally, to understand catalysts, you need to know what cell count is. Cell count refers to the catalytic mesh and how restrictive it is. So we'll put some B-roll over so you can see inside the cat, but there's the mesh, right? And the cell count refers to how many perforations there are per square inch of fabric within that mesh. So as standard, the Ferrari catalysts have 800 cells, meaning they have 800 perforations per square inch, and therefore there's a lot of material in that square inch of fabric. If you go down to something like a 100 cell, then it's obviously got much bigger holes and much less material in the way. But you need to be careful because there's a bit of physics that you don't want to undermine, and that is exhaust scavenging. Now, the guys at Donut made an absolute meal of this. I'll try and do it a bit more simply. Every time a cylinder fires in an engine, it produces a pulse of gas, like a bubble of gas. And as that travels down the exhaust system, it creates an area of low pressure behind it, which helps to suck the next pulse along. So think about something like drafting in NASCAR or getting a tow in Formula One. You know, you're going behind the car in front of you, it creates an area of low pressure, you can then zoom along, get some extra speed. What exhaust scavenging requires is back pressure, and that is the amount of pressure within the system. If you were to completely remove a catalyst, or you were to install a straight pipe rear section, anything that would reduce pressure, what you will do is eventually there will not be enough back pressure for the exhaust system to scavenge efficiently. And what that manifests itself as is a loss of torque. So if you install a straight through system, you will gain top end horsepower at the cost of low end torque. So be careful. It's another reason why I do not recommend decats. Now, this is the most complicated part, is when we start talking about GPFs. Every single F12 in the world was only fitted with catalysts. There is no F12 on Earth, including the TDF, that has gasoline particulate filters. And the early superfasts were not fitted with the GPFs either. So, spoiler alert, every single one of these parts on the floor will fit an F12 and it will also fit an early Superfast. They are literally the same part numbers. However, every single GTS and every single Superfast from late 2019 and every single Competizione were all fitted with the GPF in addition to the catalyst. So the exhaust flow on those cars goes from the manifolds into the pre-cat or GPF and then into the main catalyst before going out the back of the car. Now we're going to talk about aftermarket, because to be honest with you, this is where an aftermarket system is made or is broken, right? As I said, as standard, the cars have 800 cells and your options are 300 cell from someone like Quicksilver, or you can do 200 or 100 cell from somewhere like Klein Innovation, or you can do decats. Now, you need to be very careful because you can, as I said, completely destroy your car, really. What I would usually recommend to people is 100 cell, because that for me is the best balance of some tempering of the exhaust note, but also having a substantial increase in volume without being ridiculous. A lot of people think they're brave enough to decat their car. The reality is, in 99% of situations, you're not. It is about the same volume as a helicopter. When you turn your car on and it cold starts, you are setting car alarms off. It's brutal and it's amazing, but it's not livable. It's a proper weekend warrior car. The other thing to mention is something like a 200 cell catalyst. As a rule, if you install 200 cells, it will not trigger a warning light. It may over time, because the catalytic material will become less efficient as it's used, but generally it will not cause a warning light immediately. Something like a 100 cell and certainly a decat, 100% of the time you will have to remap the car or install some kind of OBD device in order to turn the warning light off. It is worth mentioning, wink wink, it's only for track use, it's not road legal, it's not going to pass a smog test, it's not going to pass an MOT. And the 200 cells are kind of a bit of a roll of the dice. Most of the time it will pass, but again, later in life, it will not pass. So that's kind of your options. I would recommend probably 100 cell. I wouldn't recommend decat, and you are probably going to regret it if you do it. The standard system and the standard cats with an exhaust behind, you can get away with on an early car that doesn't have GPFs, but if it does have GPFs, you absolutely have to do the catalyst, otherwise it's not worth doing an exhaust at all. Now the next bit to talk about is probably the most misunderstood, and this is what Ferrari calls the central extension, and this is where the Xpipe goes. Now, the reason I say that this is misunderstood is that a lot of people don't necessarily realize that as standard, Ferrari does actually have a blend channel here. So this bit right here is a blend pipe. So this is an H-pipe as standard. But what does an X-pipe do? So fundamentally, an H-pipe and an X-pipe do the same thing, but they do them slightly differently. This is more about balancing pressure. And it does affect the sound slightly, but not as pronouncedly as an Xpipe. An Xpipe has a much more gradual blend between the two channels. And what it actually does, and it's very nerdy audiophile stuff, but basically when you collide two sound waves together, you get something called destructive or constructive phasing. Destructive phasing is like noise cancelling earphones. What you do is you take a noise, and you basically invert the phase of it, you turn it upside down in simple terms, and if you play them at the same time, the sum is zero, so you get nothing. That's how noise cancelling earphones work. In the case of an Xpipe, you get constructive phasing, and that is certain frequencies will crash together and it will boost certain frequencies, create harmonic overtones. Again, in very simple terms, what this thing does is it boosts the high-end frequencies. But there is a key reason why this on its own does not work. And the reason that it won't work on its own is that it requires increased gas flow in order to work properly. So there's two ways of achieving that. Either you can replace the catalysts with some higher flow units, and that gets the gas flowing more quickly because there's less back pressure. Or what you can do is you can install less restrictive rear silencers. That's a more effective way of doing it. That also does the same thing to a certain extent. But without that accelerated gas flow, you don't sort of amp up the Venturi effect that you get at the blend. And as such, you don't get as many of the overtones and as much of a harmonic increase as you would without them. So a lot of people would say to me, oh, can I just install an Xpipe? And like, yeah, physically you can, But it just ends up being a waste of money because it doesn't really do that much. You'll be expecting this amazing change to your exhaust note and it will basically just sound the same. And the other thing to mention is that to install this, you need to take off the rear silencers anyway. So you might as well just crack on and do it. Next in the stream, we've got these, which are literally just link pipes. So that's as much as you need to know about them. They link that to that, that's it. The really key part are the silencers. They're a very important part of the kind of ingredient list. How do people make them sound different? That has to do with what goes on inside here. Again, in very simple terms, you've got chambers within here called Helmholtz resonators. And what they do is they use that constructive, destructive phasing that I spoke about earlier to reduce certain frequencies to ensure that you don't get drone in the cabin, for example, and then boost other frequencies to make sure that the exhaust sounds nice. So that's how different manufacturers kind of differentiate theirs. From a consumer point of view, the most important thing are the valves, and all valve silencers pretty much work the same way. And that is that essentially what this valve does, so this is a pneumatic valve, and as it moves, it basically turns a butterfly inside there that restricts the flow. When the valve is closed, what happens is the exhaust gases come down here, that's shut, so it can't go down there. It goes through this more restrictive pipe into the silencer, and then out of this pipe right here, that is your silenced channel. Now, when the valve opens, and it may open 100%, it may open 40%, different manufacturers have it tuned to do different things. But when it's open, this is more than likely just going to be a bypass. So that it won't actually pass through any silencers. It will just shoot straight through. This pipe here will be this pipe here, and that's kind of your money. There is a thing that you don't get on Ferraris though, that a lot of people order, and I always recommend, which is a remote kit. And the way the remote kit works is actually very simple. So first of all, you have to understand how the valves work as standard. What Ferrari have in their cars is something called load request. And very simply what that does is based on three metrics, which are the speed of the engine, RPM, the percentage of throttle input, and the speed at which you're traveling. It has an algorithm that basically decides that it needs to either open or close the valves. As you turn the Manettino to the right, that algorithm becomes more sensitive and will open it up earlier. But again, there's this huge misconception that, oh, my valves open at 2000 RPM. Sure, like it may be around 2,500, 3,000 RPM, but it does vary. If you are right at the bottom of the rev range and you absolutely plant your foot in race mode or CT off, it will open up the valves. Now, a remote kit is basically a button and it just gives you one functionality, and that is to override the load request and open the valves. On the 812 anyway, it gets much more complicated with something like the Pista or the F8 because that uses completely different valve logic, but here it uses load request. When you press the button, it just opens the valves, keeps them open, and it will then shut when you turn the car off. There are certain systems that you can buy that will allow you to force the valves closed. That is a terrible idea, and you must not do that. What that will do is it will overheat the cats, which is not something you ever want to do because they will just blow up, and that will be a very expensive mistake, so do not do that. But yeah, so the valve silencers all pretty much work the same way. You've got a loud channel, quiet channel. Valve either allows or restricts the flow through those channels. And what you can do is you can get a remote kit that will allow you to open the valves whenever you want. And that's quite an affordable way of getting a little bit more noise. It won't transform the way the car behaves, but it will certainly improve it. And that is your relatively high level overview of the F12 812 exhaust, but we're gonna do a quick fire round. Let me see if I can do it. So 6-into-1 manifolds, don't need to do anything to them, they're fantastic. Here you've got catalysts. On the F12 and early 812, there's no GPF. They have 800 cells as standard. You can swap to a 200 cell if you want to try and avoid having a warning light. I would recommend 100 cell because it sounds the best. DCAT, you're a mentalist if you do it, don't do it. For GPFs, they are fitted to every GTS and every late 2019 onwards Superfast. Another bunch of warning lights to manage, but it can be done and I would recommend it. From here, you've got the central extension that can be swapped for an Xpipe. The Xpipe on its own will not do a great deal, but certainly if you replace the rear silencers or the catalysts, you'll then get all the benefits of that slightly higher pitched exhaust note. It's a very important part. These are very boring, don't do very much other than transport gas, a bit like me. And then you've got the rear silencers. So these are a really key ingredient, as I said. I would always recommend swapping for a slightly higher flow version, something like a Klein Innovation or a Quicksilver. You've got the valves on there that either restrict or allow gas flow through the loud, quiet channels. But a very important part is the remote kit, which allows you to override the valve logic and keep the valves open as much as you want. I did it in one. What's up? Guys, thank you very much for watching. If you do want to buy any aftermarket stuff, we can offer you a whole host of brands. So please navigate to our website, which is in the description below. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful, we'd love a thumbs up because it really, really helps. If you want to see more videos like this, please hit the subscribe button and we will see you on the next one. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.